Russia now heads the United Nations Security Council. That's something Ukrainians are calling a symbolic blow. The position rotates every month between members, and because it's an international body, there's no means to block Moscow from assuming the post, something that Russia says it will use to exercise all of its rights, even as the U.S. urges Russia to conduct itself professionally. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, called it an absurdity of a new level, while Ukraine said the blow was to the international rules-based order. Russia last held the position in February of 2022 when it launched the war in Ukraine, but this time it's coming while Vladimir Putin is subject to an arrest order by the International Criminal Court for War Crimes. Now, we are joined by Velina Tchakarova, who is a geopolitical strategist, and she's joining us from Vienna. Walk us through the UN here, and is this really an absurdity? Because we see Saudi Arabia on human rights councils and similar stories to that. What makes this one so strange, all things considered?
Thank you very much for the invitation. And indeed, this presidency right now is taking place at a critical moment. First, because Ukraine is preparing the next counteroffensive, and obviously Russia will be able to block any kind of positions or discussions within the UN Security Council, the most important body at the level of the United Nations. Second, it has a very strong symbolic meaning, and specifically for the countries in the so-called global south. Let me remind you that these countries have been kind of caught in a binary world over the last, let's say, almost 14 months of Russia's war against Ukraine, as on the one hand, the West imposed the most severe sanctions on a country, but on the other side, of course, they were still also having very important trade relations with China. And here, the critical element is China, which has, by the way, diplomatically supported Russia, and even within the UN Security Council, there is this trend of, on the rise when it comes to the coordination of important positions and actions on critical matters of international relations. So it's not just about Ukraine, it's about other important issues related to Iran, to Syria, and so on. So what I expect here is that first, Russia, of course, will use the platform. Think of the topic of the nuclear non-proliferation, with the announcement just a week ago to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Second, it will use the platform to project diplomatic, as I said, diplomatic, clout to those countries that are not sticking to the Western sanctions, and to practically, let's say, convince the rest of the world that there is not only one option here, the one being presented by the West. And third important issue, I argue that here, once again, we see a clear signal that goes towards a Cold War 2.0 scenario, a bifurcation of the global system where, on the one hand, we have the West that is rooting for a rules-based order based on these international organizations, including the UN Security Council. But on the other hand, we have the dragon bear, China and Russia, presenting a counter-narrative to the United States and also, of course, within the United Nations.
Well, thank you very much for breaking it down, Velina. I'm very glad you brought up some of those points, because this sort of attack on the rules-based order and the rise of Western rivals to global preeminence is certainly an interesting and concerning trend that we're going to see played out not just over the past year, but over the coming decade as a whole. Thank you very much for joining us to break that down. And